Greetings one and all, I'll be making this absolutely awesome looking deck biomask from Predator Badlands, lovingly crafted by DO3D. It is a wearable helmet, but I'm going to make it more as a biomask prop. And I'll be printing it 100% in FDM, no resin printers today, using my brand new Kobra S1 combo, thanks to Anycubic for sending it over for a bit of a play with. And I'm going to see if it's actually going to replace my old trusty bamboo A1, which I'm so sorry to say is usually just shoved up in the corner nowadays. So stick around as I show you how I go from this to this to this, with more than a few moments of madness in the middle. Right, let's crack on. Right, as seems to be the trend nowadays with the algorithm, I'm going to say straight away, a like, a subscribe and a comment, any kind of positive interaction would be amazing, especially watching the video through to the end. That signals to the algorithm that you're enjoying the content and helps push it out to more people, which makes me happy, which makes you happy, which makes the whole 3D printing community happy. So with the shameless begging done for another video, let's get on to actually prepping this thing to print. So Anycubic were kind enough to send me a Kobra S1 combo, so I decided to put it to good use straight away, and the next project on my list to do was this helmet, which I would have printed in one piece on my bamboo H2D. So as you can see, I decided to cut it straight through the middle because I thought the sort of pointed seam of the bit in the middle down through his nose and mouth would actually hide the join. So I sliced it in Blender using a plane. I know you could very easily do this in your slicer of choice. I just love the controls and the freedom that Blender sort of gives me. I can have a good look around, I can really plan things out a lot easier. So I added in these connecting sort of holes. I'll print off some 6mm square cubes to sort of help join the two sides together, and then decided that this was going to be the place to cut it into the quarters so that each piece would be able to fit on the build plate and print pretty well. And as usual, I was looking for those areas where I can make a straight flat cut that can sit on the build plate nice and sturdily in a way that the supports will be minimal, hidden, and so that any details such as the sort of frongs at the back of the helmet will be pointing straight up into the sky to get the best possible quality of print. Now, I had never used or needed to use Anycubic's FDM slicer, but I was quite happy to see that it is basically exactly the same as Bamboo Studio or Orca slicer and that kind of thing. I was going to go with what I usually do, which is a 0.12mm layer height, just playing it safe. Change the supports to tree, the end fill to gyroid, and to about 4 or 5%. Then circle back around again to change the support to tree slim. And I nearly forgot to do what I always do, is set the Z top distance of the supports to just under double the layer height. A lot of people say you can go up to double, but I don't know why, I just always do it just a little bit less. After slicing it, it says it's going to take about 10 hours. And then it suddenly occurred to me that I hadn't actually got the printer out of the box, so I thought I'd best get cracking on that. Now, the build plate on the Kobra is just about a centimetre down to the sides bigger than the A1. I don't know how much that is cubed. I'm not mathing that. Now, it was actually serendipitous that I got this printer to take a look at, because I was in the market actually for buying my own Core XY enclosed printer, and the Kobra S1 had caught my eye with the ability to heat and dry the filament as you print via the AMS. Unboxing was the usual affair and pretty easy, and then I decided to just jump straight into a print that comes on the USB provided without any calibration and just see how good it was straight out the box. And this tiny T-Rex looked pretty good to me. And I'm not just saying this, but this actually is the best benchy that I've printed. Better than the bamboo ones that I printed off the H2D and the A1. And considering it was straight off the USB without any kind of calibration, I was quite excited to get started on the helmet. However, I'm sad to say that the tree supports did fail mid-print. It seemed like the old bed adhesion thing had reared its head, but I've had that problem with every new FDM printer that I've had. So I cleaned it yet again and swapped to normal supports just to have that bigger structure. And I printed two versions of it, one with adaptive layer heights on the left and one with just a 0.12 across the board. And although you could tell the difference really close up, I decided to go with the 0.12mm because on the adaptive layer height there was some splodges here and there. So without having to go through a load of calibration tests, I decided to just stick with what I know is safe and print the rest of it and join it up together, and it seemed to go together rather nicely. I then set about printing out the back quarters, and I decided to swap to the black PLA. And sadly, I kept having failure after failure, even after flow calibration and temperature calibration tests. And according to ChatGPT, it was down to the Kobra trying to print too quickly. But after slowing it all down, it all worked out great. And I'll share those settings in the project PDF that will be available to all my absolute fiend tier Patreon members. And it's time to put the back and front quarters together for the left side. And the parts did marry up perfectly, so there's no shrinkage or warping sort of issues. I did use a brim, a 5mm outer brim on each part, and of course they marry up perfectly when you test it, but it's a whole other ball game when you try to do it when it's smothered in super glue, which annoyingly is usually stupidly strong, but this time it decided to just barely grip, and I had to sit there for ages holding it. But then I remembered ages ago I bought this welder thingy tool, which I thought would be fun to use right now. This is the sort of thing I bought it for, to be honest. It comes with a choice of these like different staples, whatever you want to call them. And you pull the trigger, you don't preheat it like you do with a glue gun, you just pull the trigger and it does some kind of electrical wizardry, and you just press it in. After a few seconds it starts to melt through, and then give it a little bit of a twist and hold it there for it to cool down, let go of the trigger obviously, and then you just pull it out, then the staple stays where it is. Then you have to snip them off, but they actually are quite hard to get off, and wear goggles because they fly around everywhere. And also, you probably have to go back and sort of grind down the last couple of mil that the clip is supplied with. It just can't get at. And some of the staples are hard to cut off because of the curvature of the inside of the helmet as well. So just be mindful of that. But they are very useful, to be honest. Because even if the glue had worked, it was only across quite a thin sort of surface area of contact. So having those extra physical sort of weld points are well worth the hassle. So after adding a few more about an inch or so apart, I was calling it done. Things are looking great because the seams are really good. It's just that one on the right hand side between the front and the back that was just slightly raised, but all the other ones lined up really, really nicely. So the next thing I actually did was just in a very, very slight gap, was run some super glue down there for two reasons. One, to just add a little bit more bonding, but also then to add a sort of shelf. So when I give it a layer of resin to smooth out the lay lines, the resin just won't seep through and drip out of any gaps in the seams. Now I need to be careful to make sure I don't obscure any of these sharp details, so make sure it doesn't pull too much, so don't put a load on your brush, or if you do, just wick it away from any of sharper details and hit it with a UV light pretty quickly to set it in place and move on to the next part. Obviously make sure you're wearing gloves, preferably a respirator, and also working in a well ventilated room. Keep yourself safe. And once it's all done and cured, make sure to give it a good wash and wipe with IPA alcohol to get all the surface residue off, to make sure the primer sticks and dries properly. And it's a bit hard to tell on camera, mainly because I accidentally used see-through resin instead of the sort of grey stuff. But hopefully it's got most of the way there, and filler primer will show up what else is needed to do on it. Which, as you can see, is actually a lot more than I thought I would have to do, sadly. So I turned to this light curing putty, which is basically a sort of putty made out of UV resin. However, when I've used it in the past, it's just too claggy. So I thought about cutting it with some of the liquid resin to see how it worked, and I gave it a quick test, and it definitely was more usable, so I carried on with that. It seemed a lot easier to mould into those shallow gaps that I've got, and just run your finger over it to give it a little bit of a smooth surface, and then you can run your tools or a knife just to dig it out of any of the holes you don't want it to be in, like these Predator symbols. Hit it with a good old UV light and onto the next part. Now for some of the larger areas, I started putting the putty on first and then dipping my fingers into the pot of resin and smearing it all over the lot of it. However, I'm not sure it's because of the fumes, but this is where I started to go a little bit mad. You see, I was concerned with the difference in textures between the parts that were covered in filler primer and the new parts that have got a little bit of this resin putty on. So we decided to smear the stuff all over the damn thing. And I know this could absolutely ruin it, but sometimes I just see a kind of red mist kind of effect. I just barrel on down a road, but be it a good idea or not. But sometimes, I have to say, this is the only way of finding if something completely different works or not. And I just hope for those happy little accidents to happen. And actually, once it was all cured, it gave a very sort of solid, ancient metal depth to the surface, like it was like really crafted out of something solid, rather than just plastic. Well, at least that's what the internal monologue was telling me at the time, just to try and cheer me up. So to sort of assess how much work still needed to be done on those gaps, I decided to do a sort of quick test pass using the graphite rub that I'd always planned to use on this biomask, in the quite desperate hopes that it would actually hide more of those gaps than it showed. So the rub only seemed to want to attach to the resin covered parts, and it didn't really want to attach itself to parts of the mask that were more covered in primer, where it hadn't quite got a proper covering of the resin, which led to actually quite an interesting patina sort of effect, which could be used for another project at another date. I'd imagine you could experiment with some interesting base colours with the rub mixed in over the top and see where you get to. So where I got to with this particular project was that I'm never going to get away with the seams looking quite as obvious as they are, so I had to turn to the sandpaper, and I started off with a 60 grit block and worked my way through up to about 400. It's still not perfect, but I had to move on. One, in order to get the video out in time, but also because this is a sort of more of a prototype project for the biomask, which I will eventually print in one piece one day on H2D. So after thinking I've probably put enough filler layers on, I just went straight to standard black primer with a little spritz of white from sort of certain angles to try and catch the highlights. It came out a little bit speckled. I obviously didn't shake the can enough, but it's going to get covered, so it wasn't too much of a problem. So back to the graphite rub, this time over black, which is what I had initially planned to do before I decided to waste all that time putting it onto the filler primer. And although this makes an absolute mess of everything, it is so satisfying to do. It really is good fun. And once it's had a layer or two, it looks fantastic. You can add more layers to it to make it shinier and brighter if you'd like to as well. So it was on to the next part, because I thought, it looked pretty good as a base for me, but I wanted to add some sort of more warmth and more texture and more detail. I've not seen the film, so I'm not quite sure how exactly it looks. There's not a lot of image reference online for the actual prop or any of the scenes from the film where the mask is showing, and there's quite a lot of variation in interpretation on the sort of fan-made builds I've seen online. So I decided to go for my own sort of look, which would be dark steel look with a sort of copper accents. But I still wanted it to look like a sort of mix of different colours, so the different lights would catch different shades and not just one flat, boring metal colour all the way through, because it would look just too simplistic, I think. One common theme I did see was to paint these sort of things around the alien symbols, a sort of copper colour, and they seem to be connected to the edge details. So I kind of made them primarily the copper areas. I then went over some of the big panels in a sort of sporadic nature with the copper to mix in with the sort of underlying steel colour to break up the big areas of a flat metal look. And we're starting to make some good progress here, and I feel like I want to go in with a really dark metal look into the recesses and break up some more of that initial steel and the secondary copper colours that I've got in there. So I gave it a pass focusing on the sort of recesses, all the areas that will catch shadow, but also adding a sort of gradient tones to the areas underneath the main sort of fold on the cheek area to the part where it goes down towards the mouth. And also a few scribbles across the bigger panel to again break into the overall big panels of similar colours to make it almost like a bit of a jumble of different shades. And I'm starting to really like this. I think it's looking great, to be honest. And I do really like the enhanced texture and features and the battle damage scars that the extra layers of resin and resin putty have brought to the table. And then to fix some of the overspray into some of the darker areas, I used the graphite rub with a Q-tip to go back over some of the overspray, and also dabbed a bit into some of these sort of damaged craters just to make them pop a little bit. But to separate out the details and break up the panels even more, I decided to mix a black with the dark metal paint and sort of panel liner all the recesses, and in between there the details meet each other. And also into the alien symbols to make them stand out a lot more. It's quite a subtle effect, but if you look at the sort of line down the centre of his nose and mouth, it does sort of make them pop out and separate them, and especially around the cheek areas. But then I kind of decided it's looking a little bit too sort of red. So I mask off these cheek areas and then spray this metallic black to create a dark gradient coming out of the sharper, darker, shadowy details up to the sharper highlight details, but stopping before I get to that point. So once I've done that all the way around, it's a case of taking a look, and here it is looking quite dark and cool in the sort of at night time with just the sort of studio lights. And here it is in the daytime with the skylight open. You can see there is actually a big difference. I can see some areas where I've actually put a bit too much of the sort of steel metallic what's it over the front of the cheek details there, just where those pits are on the left of the right of the mouth. So in order to break things up even more, I decided to go in with a lighter, more silvery metallic on the top panels that would be facing the light. And now I'll go back through and add in some more of that copper details along the mandible areas. And I know I'm going back and forth like a thing that goes back and forth a lot, but it's a learning process. I haven't really got any good reference to go off. I was just trying different things. But after a few more sort of passes with it, I think I'm finally at a place where it's really got that lived-in, real-world, tactile feel to it, which I think is really enhanced by the texture and the battle damage that's come from the fantastic STL for a start, but also adding on the extra sort of bumps and surface texture from the different finishing techniques that I used. Well, if you can call them a technique, it's kind of just bodging it all together really. So with that done, it was onto the lenses, and because I want it to be a prop and not a wearable thing, I printed them in a black PLA from Anycubic. And just going back to the Anycubic Kobra S1 combo, I do really like it so far. It's got a few teething problems, but I think that's more about sort of calibrating and getting the settings correct more than anything else. So I will be keeping that over the A1, and I certainly recommend anybody take a look at it if they're considering a similar sort of purchase. There is a affiliate link in the description below. I do get a small commission if you do buy one, but I do like it. So if it's on your radar anyway, take a look, see what you think. So not so much an in-depth review as such, but just a real opinion from somebody who's picked one up and managed to make a really decent project out of it virtually straight away. I tell you what I didn't make a decent job of is once I sanded and sprayed the lenses, I put them in and used super glue from the back, and then turned it around and didn't realise it had seeped down the front and ruined the finish. So I have to punch them through and do all the sanding again. So after starting off at 60 and working the way all the way up to 2000 this time, which is a lot more than I was using before, I sprayed them black and then sprayed on the copper sort of highlight. I know that the light would probably catch the lenses anyway, but I wanted to sort of put it in there so it would have a bit of variation when the light does catch it. And this time I used a glue gun to secure it, so a lot less mess. And I reckon that painted highlight looks pretty effective. And after quite a few ups and downs, it's finally done. So the last thing to do is just to make it look sexy with some sexy lighting. So thanks to Anycubic for sending over the Kobra. Thanks to Do3D for a fantastic SDL. Thanks to all my patrons and any support that everybody else gives me. And don't go just yet, make sure that you go over to my playlist or my channel and take a look at all my other videos. Give them a watch and a like and a comment, because you'll find a lot of the topics covered in this video are covered in more depth on a lot of my other videos. And speaking of my channel, we're coming up to the 1-year anniversary of it launching as Crackfox Studios, and I can't believe how far I've come and how much support I've had from everybody. It's been amazing, and I'm thinking of something cool to do to sort of mark and celebrate it, so watch this space. Right, I've done enough waffling as usual, so I'll catch you next time.